Darkness, 10, 9.
You're listening to the Launchpad Podcast with J-Man.
Brought to you by GallantMEDIA.
2, 1.
Here's your host,
Ignition.
J-Man.
Are you religious as well?
Not so much, no.
Not so much. I'd like that. Can we dip into that at all?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, I think that'd be really fascinating. Okay. So spiritual, but not religious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I have a lot to say about that. So yeah, we can definitely go into things on that note.
Okay. Don't get me pegged. People already think I'm like a hardcore right winger. Now I'm going to be like, Antichrist. I'm not going to have a show next season.
Oh shit.
So Corey Sheikh. So Sheikh.
Yeah.
People just call you Sheikh.
Yeah, that's like my nickname a lot when I was younger. And then, obviously Sheikh means like spiritual teacher in the Muslim tradition. So it kind of ended up sticking, even though I'm not affiliated with any sort of Muslim tradition, but it's just funny. So.
All right. So you kind of gave yourself a nice little intro. Sheikh, thank you for being right here on the Launchpad Podcast. And this is going to be a great episode. So Sheikh is going to walk us through a whole bunch of things, like the eclipses that are going on right now. We're going to talk about being authentic. That's his specialty, authentic awakening. And then just how to navigate through these COVID times. Right now, it seems to kind of be the best of times, but we're just coming out of the worst of times. And then the difference, I guess, in between being spiritual and being religious. And I can't wait to touch on that with you. His specialty is authentic awakening, purification, detox, how you can heal anything. And I'm sure we'll dive into that in resting in peace in times of apparent chaos, which is why we're having this conversation right now. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks, bro. It's really great to be here.
All right. So let's just start off with, what got you into this line of work? Obviously, you must have had an awakening of your own or a call, and I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, that's a big story. And I mean, I think it'd be summed up to because I feel like, a common person that hears the term awakening, it could be a confusing term, right? Like, what does this mean? What does that even, it doesn't hold necessarily so much weight as much as it does for those who are really like walking through it or identify themselves as, maybe on a path of discovering themselves or their purpose or who they truly are. But I feel like those terms, answering the question, who am I? Discovering why am I here on this planet Earth in this body, is there something beyond this body or maybe even beyond death? Because that's maybe one of the most fundamental questions that most people have, right? Like, well, what's going to happen, when I die and these types of things. So these were all questions I had when I was very young. And they were things I was always pondering when I was young, but I often didn't really have the answers. I wasn't finding the answers that I wanted. My parents maybe didn't really understand or know, how to answer these, or they would answer like what, society would typically answer them, often through the lens of religious conversations or various dogmas or belief structures. And that wasn't truly satisfying for me. But that, didn't last too long. I mean, it would come in spurts through my childhood where I'd have these questions or I'd have these experiences in my room or in dreams or just epiphanies when I was younger about things that nobody really could understand. So they were often short-lived, right? Because if there's no context within the environment to support what's arising, you're either given some pills or you're put in some psych ward or you're dealt with because you're a nuisance at that point, right? So I fortunately I wasn't really dealt with. It was just kind of these arising questions or these arising experiences naturally just dissipated and kind of dissolved. So
Right.
You fall back into typical childhood, and typical childhood I find in the common day is not necessarily the most conducive place for discovering ourselves, in a way that, like we said, is authentic to who we are. I mean, I think it's changing, but all the different things that we go through, whether it's the needing to fit in or needing to find ourselves very quickly before university and determine where are we going, what's our career going to be, how are we going to make money. These are all the typical pressures that I face, like many of us. And but there was always this deeper longing underneath it all, because the deeper longing I feel is for us to come to a place of peace, a place where we can accept ourselves, for who we are. We can accept life for what it is, not always needing to make it better or change it or all that. That's really what I was seeking, but it was coming in the form of, at least for me, the typical man's dream, I had a prominent fighting career that I was focused on, mixed martial arts when I was in my younger teens and early 20s. The typical desires to be wealthy, to be popular, to have status,
Fuck yeah.
right?
Yeah, why not? You
all
know?
the things, right?
Well, I really think that's fascinating because I come from an MLM background, right? I worked in radio for many years, and then you get into MLM, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but they're always talking about abundance, right? And the ability that you can earn as much as you want and to think big. Like, if people aren't laughing at your dreams, you're not dreaming big enough, right? And there was a point where I became conflicted in regards to, like, what are the things in life that I really want that are important to me, opposed to the things that people keep on telling me that maybe I want. Like, my solution is going to be to make more money because then I can do A, B, C, D. So money gives you options. Money isn't a bad thing, but money isn't necessarily for everyone. And dreaming big that way may not be the thing for everyone either, opposed to maybe going deep down within one person's self and their pure abundance and their manifestations. What really matters to them would be finding their best self, finding their spiritual awakening. And I want to ask this question because we met during turbulent times, right around where COVID began. Like, people were really freaking out. I don't even think we knew what it was, where it came from, all that kind of stuff. And I believe very much in energy. We're all energies. And I'm guessing you're going to be bang on with this kind of stuff. And I felt really compelled, number one, just to get your information. It's been maybe about a year later now. And here we are having a conversation. I felt like I had to have a conversation with you. Like there was a pull. And so many people dismiss that kind of thing. What's really going on there when you feel this pull, maybe to give that person a phone call, or maybe it's time to get together and have a beer or whatever it might be when it comes to that human interaction?
Well, I feel the most practical way to put it is if we just take a moment to look at our life and we look at, okay, we may have had moments where we were in deep suffering, deep pain, deep confusion and depression, sadness, all of the kind of, darker aspects of our human experience. And then on the other side, we may have had experiences that were, so joyful, like, like a childbirth, or, maybe, a realization of who we are, connecting to a certain spiritual essence. There's many different forms of what we could look at on the other spectrum. But within the full spectrum of those, the high and low, we could say that there was always this fundamental consistent essence or sense of ourselves that remained, right? Like, if we go back to when we were 5 years old, 20 years old, 50 years old, 100 years old, there's still this constant sense of self that is this kind of substratum connectivity that has always been there. Like, when we think, oh, myself, like, who is myself? Well, there's always been that sense of self, no matter if we were in the depths of our own pain and sorrow, in our room curled up in a ball, or we were out and enjoying our experience and enjoying life. There's still that same sense of self that has always been there. So even through the movements of the coming and going of feelings, thoughts, experiences, circumstances, relationships, there's still this consistent substratum experience that is always there.
Right.
And
So this would be like a continuum, is what you're saying.
Yes.
There's always Sheikh and there's always Jason.
Sure, and
Okay.
and we could use the name to identify it, but really the name is what's identifying just this mind and body, and
Okay.
this mind and body that has experiences and memories and traumas and likes, dislikes, personalities, all of the above. But underlying all of that, there's that same sense of self that maybe is even beyond the name. And specifically, we could say that there is, in that sense of self, there is kind of this inner compass right? There's guidance, this inner guidance that knows no matter how dark it's got or how great it's got, there's always that guidance that's always kind of guiding the ship, in some sense. And of course, the majority and all of us in some ways don't always listen to that, but we often are receiving the feedback as to what happens when we do listen to that or we don't. We face the consequences, whether they are favorable or not. And so when we're speaking to something like, oh, I feel a natural resonance to speak to someone, or I just feel like I need to go to this place, or I need to open this book, or I gotta click on this video, or whatever it is that we're feeling, there is that inner sense of guidance that is very subtle. It's not glamorous. It's not necessarily this big blown out thing. It's a very subtle inner kind of hunch or nudge into something that is essentially revealing more of ourselves to ourselves. Right? Because that's really what, if we want to look at what is the purpose of our human experience, in my view, it would be to come to know who we truly are. What else was there really to do than to discover?
Yeah, I like what you said in there in regards to just, the names. There was a book that I was reading, Wayne Dyer, and it was speaking on how we are not humans having spiritual experiences. We're spirits having a human experience, right? We are intention. And with taking everything into consideration and the fact that so many people's equilibriums right now are off due to circumstances out of their control, right? To a degree, right? Because we all have choice, no matter what happens, good or bad, or whether you want to label it good or bad, that's what we do, right? Is people feel, regardless, that, I can't go onto a patio. I can't hang out with all my friends. I can't go to a movie theater. I can't do this. I can't do that. Where do people fall into like this destructive loop? People obviously know that they're down. They know that their energy has shifted, but what are some of the things that they can do? Like, what would your guidance be in regards to helping people getting out of that negative feedback loop and finding something else to replace that with that will nourish their soul opposed to dampen it?
Well, it would really come back, primarily to what we just mentioned, which is, in my experience in my own life and in what I constantly am reminded of when I interact with really anybody, is that inner guidance or that inner nudge, that inner hunch to move oneself in a direction that will foster a deeper sense of joyfulness, peace, love, compassion, etc., is always available. It's always present. It's always there. It's often, though, that when we're in the depth of our pain or in the depth of a place of suffering or confusion or chaos, etc., because it seems so insurmountable, so big, the sadness, the confusion, the pain, it's so big. We often think the solution also has to be very big. So we could think that the inner nudge could simply be, oh, let's just go take a walk, because often walks, you just go take a long walk and a lot of your issues are just going to fade away, at least for a period of time, you know what I mean? And an infinite array of different other things that we may feel called to do. But those things don't seem big enough to handle what is seemingly so important and big and large and insurmountable, right? So it's very much a process of listening. I think listening, the energy of listening is such an important tool at this time, because the majority of our life experience in these bodies and in this society is about not listening, but pushing and penetrating the world and moving into the world and making our mark and, engaging, acting. It's very much this outer movement and push, when we've forgotten also that life is not just a push, but it's a pull. It's a to and from. It's an in breath and an out breath. So the listening of, okay, if our body is saying you just need to drop your work right now, get up and go take a walk, or maybe you've been thinking about, meditating a bit. Maybe it's time to just go start like a 5-minute meditation practice, right? Or maybe your diet is too heavy and that's making you feel lethargic, and maybe we need to lighten that up a little bit. Like, there's so many ways in which the body is always speaking to us that, and we're just not listening. That's often what's happening, right?
Right.
We're not listening to see, okay, sure, we may be in pain and we may be in spaces that seem so big. It doesn't mean the solution is this gigantic thing that needs to change.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's quite possibly the best answer I have ever gotten to that type of question in regards to a solution for someone in that space. We have these big problems and we think we have to have this big solution. Kind of like the analogy of cleaning a home, right? You can look at this messy home and like, my God, I'm never going to get this home clean. So you don't bother, not realizing that maybe if you just start with a closet or even just half the closet, just open the door and at least organize that one closet and just do a little bit, day by day, month by month, year by year, be a completely different person, have a completely different result. So thank you for that. That was really a great nugget. And I also heard you mention breathing, and I'm a little bit shocked that I didn't mention this off the top because I know how important it is to breathe. And I used to do it as part of my exercises, even in business before we would, take on phone calls or things that nature, take a couple of minutes to breathe. So many people don't realize that we're shallow breathers. When you actually stop to take a deep breath, you feel it because so many of us don't do it. And we almost take it for granted, which sounds so horrible because without it, obviously, we don't exist. The importance of breathing, Sheikh, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned it, right? It's like it's the one thing that we can go the least amount of time without before we inevitably pass away, right? And especially if we don't have some sort of training with our breath, right? So, the way that I've been humbled in my experience to recognizing what I don't have a choice to be grateful or appreciative of, I have to be grateful or appreciative of, which, gratitude and appreciation can be a practice, but fundamentally it's just acknowledgement, right? Like if we just simply bring our attention to acknowledge something, that is the most fundamental practice of gratitude and appreciation. And so that's where it starts, right? Like if we have the ability just to go through, a few moments, hopefully many moments in our day where we can just simply bring our attention and acknowledge the flow of our breath, just that in itself is essentially the doorway into something like meditation. Like that's one of the most foundational, fundamental meditative practices, which is let's just watch the natural inflow and outflow of the breath. And just like watching the inflow and outflow of some waves or the trees or the sun or the clouds will bring peace. It will bring, such a direct, very quick experience of peace because all you're doing is dropping all the things that you think you need to be doing or think you need to be thinking about and think you need to be engaging and controlling and manipulating in our life, and just coming back to watch the natural processes that are always keeping you healthy and alive and loved, essentially. It's the most fundamental form of love, to recognize that the body, no matter how bad you treat it, will still handle itself for you as best as it can, right? And so all of, coming back to that piece where I mentioned, like in my journey, being humbled to my experience of recognizing what I can't go without is where I started focusing and changing my focus upon these things with more intensity, more amount of energy, more amount of time, because I recognize, like, just like when we don't pay attention to like a relationship or a loved one, right? And then inevitably someone comes to their deathbed and they see how much time they wasted focusing on other things, recognizing what really mattered. Well, even beyond that, it starts with our own body, right? And the care for our own body and how our body is speaking to us through the breath, through its digestive processes, through its, through the skin and the hair and the nail, like seeing like how's your body speaking to you. And that comes first and foremost through attention, bringing attention to it. Right.
That's some deep shit. And you have lovely hair. So I know you're definitely paying attention. If I get a spiritual awakening, will I start to grow my hair back? Like, is that what I'm missing?
I don't know, man. I don't know. It's been a long run, but it's definitely it's been fun. It's been a fun run. I had to go through that middle phase though, and that's a gauntlet.
Right. You don't know how it's going to turn out, right?
Oh man.
Did you have to man bun it at one point?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Man bun. There you have that little flick man bun, but
right.
Yeah, many phases, and Yeah, the hair is not, I mean, it's all been a natural process, over time, just returning to the natural way. That's how I see it. Not to say you can't have short hair, but it just happened. I didn't even think. I was just like, oh, I'm gonna start growing it.
You're gonna start a fight here? What's going on? Like, so, yeah. So we talked about the breathing, and you kind of you tickled on the meditation. So
yeah.
for people that are struggling to meditate, can you please, share with the listener how simple it is to meditate? This doesn't have to be a big deal. I think it's going back to what you said in regards to meditation seems like it's something really big, and people are looking for some big way to do it when it can be something so simple.
Yeah. Well, coming back to the breath, I mean, it really is the doorway, like just a practice of acknowledging the breath, watching the breath for 5 minutes, just not doing anything, just watching it in and out, can be really helpful. But what's important also to acknowledge is that the majority don't really understand or see the benefit in what meditation is. I mean, there's enough Western science now proving meditation benefits, so I don't really need to get into that, because often people have this idea that spiritual practice, meditation, all these kind of Eastern stuff doesn't have any scientific backing. But we're in a time now where we can very much see that that's the case. And all the ancients always knew that this is one of the highest form of science, these practices. So that's always helpful, though. If someone wants the left brain stuff, you can go and see, of course, what that is. But what's important also, though, to understand, and this is where I got ignited into it, is that the majority of my life, even though I was seeking all of these external things, and the promises of the rewards of these external things, be it the status, the power, the money, the clothes, the women, the businesses, all of the things that, at least from a typical man's point of view, that was what I was desiring. None of them were providing any relief from my long time of anxiety and a lack of self-confidence, confusion, inability to just kind of just chill out for any period of time, all these things that were so predominant throughout the core of my childhood and into my 20s. They never went away with the attainment of these external things. Even if I just got a small amount or a big amount, it didn't matter, right? So for me, that was the doorway, because I recognized that it wouldn't matter if I kept going and kept making up more desires and more goals and more achievements. It wasn't really going to change what I had been really seeking, which was peace and a sense of clarity from this anxiety, this inner stress, this inner lack of understanding of who I was. So that was my doorway into meditation, where I recognized, I heard people talking about it. It was all around me, whatever. So it was just a doorway into, well, what else at this point? Nothing is really working. And I think a lot of people are coming to that stage now where, in the face of, like I said, apparent chaos, because for me, it doesn't necessarily look as chaos, but for some it may be, that's going to force one to take a look inside. Because if we've just looked at all of the outer things in our experience, and again, it doesn't provide consistent peace or consistent stability. It may provide short term, but not consistent. That's where the meditation, in my experience, will provide that, right? So it can start with just the breath. It can start with going for a long walk. It can start with a painting. It could start with just listening to music, where the real purpose with practicing meditation is, I mean, there's many purposes, there's many different benefits, but the core of it, in my view, is to come to actually recognize and answer the question, who am I? That's fundamentally what the purpose of meditation is. The benefit could be a release from anxiety, or a release from stress, or a clear mind, more focus. These are all things that are benefits, and there's many meditations that can be focused on for each of those benefits. If you want to calm the nervous system, if you want to develop more focus, develop your memory, develop your cognition, have more emotional intelligence, and be able to actually feel emotion maybe for the first time instead of numbing it. There's all different forms of meditation for each of those that I've taught for almost 10 years now. But the core of all meditation is really focused on an inner discovery to see, okay, and I usually give this example because it's the most concrete. When we look at, say, these objects, I have a laptop on my desk, I got a phone, I got some juice here. these are objects, right? So if I'm the subject, being this mind and body, I can observe these objects and I understand these are separate from me, right? Object, subject. When I close my eyes and I can perceive thoughts, emotions, sensations, and I can recognize that, well, if I'm perceiving them, just like I'm perceiving these objects, well, there must be a subject. So if I close my eyes and I can perceive a thought or a feeling or a sensation, well, then now the object is a thought, a feeling, a sensation, and the subject is, well, who, right? And this is what dissolves all of the material-based science that says, well, we are only just mind and body. But it's like, well, how can the brain observe itself, right? It's like an object, there has to be a subject to observe whatever is arising. And thus, if we go inwards and now all of a sudden we're seeing from a vantage point that observes the mind, it observes the emotions, it observes the sensations. There must be a subject there. There must be an original subject. And that is often the light spark that opens up a whole new doorway. Because if our whole life we've identified as this mind and body only, but as soon as we close our eyes, we're now observing that mind and body. Well, who or what is observing that?
You're going to make me drink.
There you go.
Yeah. That's fantastic stuff. So, wow. And I guess you would be a fan of quantum physics.
Yeah. It's a great tool. It's a great tool for sure.
Right. Okay. And let's just say baseline for people. What is quantum physics? Because I think it's, again, one of those things that seems like, oh my God, that's so big. But quantum physics on a very low level is something very easy to understand and implement.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a huge expert on that in particular, but I mean, the basic essence of quantum physics is the physics of energy. It's the physics of the fundamental fabric of creation. So if we can recognize that traditional physics that works with, material, the material world, the manifested material world, when we look at quantum physics, we're looking at the unmanifest, right? We're looking at what does exist that may not be perceivable by our material senses, for one, and what has been often out of the loop of traditional science. But when we're looking at quantum, we're looking at like the most fundamental substratum of all manifested creation. So anything that's material, there is an original spark, if you will, an original quantum particle that is going to give rise to all of the movements of the many forms of material substance. So when we start to understand this underlying fabric of reality, like the understanding that, well, if energy is not created or destroyed, for one, then all energy exists on an infinite fabric that is just an oscillation. It's like a big ocean moving, right? And so these original quantum particles that are generally in the form of a wave particle, or a wave constant, then when they manifest as something, they turn into an actual form.
Right, which we manifest. We are the manifestors. Yeah.
Correct. Through our observation.
Right.
Right. So when like for instance, when we were speaking about the idea of like, oh, this chaos, the apparent chaos that we're living in, we could say yes, that there is a co-created manifested form of COVID, the lockdowns, all of these topics. But the way in which we individually interact with each of that is going to be determined based on the attention that we are bringing to any particular subject. So if we are constantly focused on, like you're mentioning, what we can't do, then we are manifesting, we are turning those waves into solid forms, and solid forms that now are crystallizing, which means basically they're solidifying, they're becoming more dense. Right. And the more we focus on them, the more dense they become, and the more difficult it becomes to actually collapse those down again.
Right, good or bad, however you decide to see it. And that's why I cannot stand the term when someone says, oh, bad things happen in threes. What a horrible thing to say, making it concrete before it even happens. Like you're waiting for it. You're on number 2 and you're already waiting for the third bad one to happen. one of the practices I really enjoyed that I found made a profound difference in my life after watching a documentary called "What the Bleep Do We Know," which was based on quantum physics, was creating my days. The power in creating my days, and I'm surprised that I ever got away from that practice. I have since then gotten back to it. But before I go to bed, or people can do this during the day when they're meditating, whatever, but just basically planning out your day in your head as you would like to see it unfold, to manifest your day. So, running into, someone that I really like. I'd love to, run into people that I like. I'm going to have a great day at work. I'm going to really enjoy the commute on the way to work. I hope, or I would manifest, abundance in many different forms, not just, in regards to monetization, but just abundance of love, of interactions, of communication. And I'm telling you, it overhauled everything. And it's not just thinking positive. Thinking positive is great, right? But really, believing in the platform that you're using, that you are creating something, that you are planting seeds that will grow. And if people could just make that tiny switch sometimes, and I know it's difficult when a person feels like they're hopeless, and you and I both know it's just that change that can happen at any moment, that spark at any moment, that no matter how crummy or how difficult or frustrating your life might be, to just not let it take hold, and to realize that at any given point that can change, not necessarily in a big boom, right? But through those small daily contributions of thinking better, manifesting differently. What was the big turnaround for you? When was that moment that you realized that you were on to something? What was that aha moment, that epiphany that brought you to where you are today? That may be somewhat of a beacon or a marker for someone out there that might be struggling.
Yeah, well, I guess it continues from the first question, when I was mentioning the beginning layers of my journey, because there was many kind of awakenings or openings, starting when I was around 16, 18, 22, there was kind of these kind of openings where I started often, would face a very challenging circumstance, not all the time, but I feel like that's often a trigger, right? Where I had my first heartbreak when I was 18. So that was like a deep, 3 weeks. I started growing a beard for the first time, and I'm like pressed in my room, and so that was an opening, because I realized, well, at a certain point of suffering, you kind of snap out of it. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever had the experience, you're like crying, but then you can stop crying at any moment. It's kind of like it becomes this almost like drama wheel that you're stuck in. And I remember experiences like that when I was younger, where you kind of snap out of it, right? And you're like, wait a minute, like there's something that needs to shift. So that was, happening in my later teens. And then I had my first a real spiritual awakening experience, which was an out of body experience when I was I think 22. And that lasted for a couple hours. So that was the first time I ever started to consider like God or spirituality for the first time. Before that, it was often more so the personal development energy, like just manifesting goals and needing to be a better person, and running a business, which I feel is very much a doorway. But I never really considered the spiritual dynamic of anything, or I didn't really care about God or spirituality much, and so that was a real shifter, because there was a certain humbling that occurred in that experience, where I recognized, this whole time, me thinking like I'm the one controlling my ship, and I'm the manifestor of my destiny, and I'm gonna create all these goals. You kind of humble yourself a little bit. You start to recognize there's a greater intelligence that's moving all things, that you're along for that ride more so than you're the director of exactly where that ship is going, right? And this, I feel, brings in conversations like free will and destiny. I think this is a big topic a lot of people consider at times in their life. Is everything just destined to happen in a certain way and I have no control? Or do I have, absolute free will, and I can just do whatever I want, and I'm just going to deal with the consequences? And my view is they're actually one and the same, and it's kind of a chicken before the egg type of experience that the mind has a lot of trouble grasping. But when we start to rest in the middle of things, that's where things can start to really, I feel, navigate in a balanced way, And so that experience for me was the opening of many different experiences over the past almost decade, where I had many different shifts and openings. And this gets into more advanced discussions, but when we look at Eastern traditions that speak of this process or journey of awakening, or some people call it the hero's journey or journey of enlightenment or something like that, there are many core stages to the path that are usually qualitatively described in the state of the person and the individual and what they're experiencing, right? And so each of those stages have very specific set of details on what your inner experience starts to be like, right? And initially, a lot of those experiences, kind of like what I just described about maybe for the first time seeing, wait a minute, I'm not the mind and body. I'm not all the movements of these thoughts, feelings, sensations. I'm beyond all of that. I'm witnessing this experience, right? And also still engaging it. That opening to me is probably one of the most practical kind of initial spiritual openings that or journey openings that somebody's going to have, because just from that alone there's so much that can be explored, right? And when that happened for me, I mean, that just opened up a whole can of worms that is just beyond anything I could really describe, or it would take me a long time to describe, at least.
Right. So what I'm hearing there is the ability to let go, like a letting go of, whether it be a letting go of who you think you are or who you thought you were, letting go of belief systems, all those things. I even felt a little bit of letting go as you were talking about it. Where do you find that most people struggle? Like, if there was a place that they could just kind of like pull out a plug where they would be able to get that release, where are most people struggling? Where, where you believe you can help them the most? I mean, this is what you do. You're phenomenal at your one-on-one sessions, and you're a change creator. And you help people realize their best self. So what's the one thing that you identify the most that you're able to provide the most amount of clarity for people?
Well, I feel it does actually relate to what you just mentioned about the letting go piece. And to be even more specific on that, we could say that the core of our suffering in regards to not being able to let go, for instance, is coming from false identification. This is one of the most fundamental principles in every tradition. It's the understanding of, if we identify with ourselves with something that is not truly ourselves, and we believe it to be ourselves, like we believe what is false to be true, then that is fundamentally the core source of all suffering, right? So if we believe that who we are is just this mind and body, well, for instance, then of course we're always going to be afraid of death, right? It's never going to end. We're always going to be afraid of death, because we know that, well, when the body dies, we're done, right? If we believe that we're a good soccer player and someone comes and says, no, you're not a good soccer player, well, our identity has just been threatened now. So we have to defend that identity in the form of proving ourselves, telling the person, getting into debate, blah, 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 whatever. Depending on our degree of identification with what is false, our beliefs, mainly not necessarily what is false, because that people could be triggered by that, but more so what is changing. If we've identified with something that is changing, then when it inevitably changes, we're going to face suffering, right? So that could be a relationship. We identify, oh, I'm in this relationship, I'm a boyfriend, I'm a girlfriend, I'm a husband, and then it changes. Okay, now I'm in suffering because I'm no longer a boyfriend. So to the degree in which we identify with that in which inevitably will change, then we are bound for suffering. We will endlessly be in suffering, right? And that's a basic, Buddhist precept. As many traditions speak to that, but fundamentally, we could say that the entirety of at least what I've explored and what I support people with in a myriad of ways is how we can release from that identification, how we can come to know what is our true identity, not how do we hold on to all these false identities, like we're like a gremlin needing to hold on to all this, we don't and we're just holding on for dear life, right? That's essentially what the people talk about, the lower ego, or the mind. It's this incessant addictive impulse to hold on to all of these changing aspects, our opinions, our belief structures, our dogmas, our relationships, what we think we're good at, bad at. We have a myriad. It's like our tool belt. It's like our wall of certificates. You know what I mean? And then we see this we see this unconsciously or consciously projected or exemplified, through everything in life. Social media, we see all these opinions back and forth, we see this is that, it's just this endless experience of separation, right? We spoke about like
Right.
quantum physics, everything's this unified field. Well,
Yeah.
all traditions spoke to the fact that we are a part of the same one gestalt of energy. We are one, essentially, these
Yeah.
kind of meme terms, but this is actually very real, but it has to be experienced as that. And
Right.
and that's a journey, right?
Well, I see that, kind of the opposite of, letting go would be holding on and like that attachment to things, which is really what damns us, right? This inability to just be able to let things go, to let these monikers that we have just go. It's not the most important thing. People always kind of, I used to say, as far as goal setting is concerned, it's always good to have a goal, set goals, but understand that sometimes life goes in different directions, right? Where maybe that goal can't be attained anymore. How are you going to shift? How are you going to change? How are you going to adapt? It doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think of so many things in my life that happened that I thought were absolutely horrible, that shifted my life forever. The most profound would be the loss of my mother. I lost my mother 5 years ago, and believe me, I'd love to have her back and just be a dumber person. Like, I'd take that. But in her passing, it made me a better person. One of the things that leaps to the front of my mind is how I failed so many people around me that had lost parents before me. Only through going through it myself did I realize what would somebody like this need, to where I've been much more present for people that have had that type of loss or any close loss, to where I understand it's not about what I say, opposed to just letting them know that a door is open. Even though they may not answer me, they're going through just a number of different emotions. Sometimes they're on autopilot. There's some people I don't remember staying at my house for a week, taking care of me, making sure that, I was going to be all right, and just making sure that, I stay constant and I stay consistent, and that that there's an outpouring of love from me to them with nothing in return. Right. And it's so easy to get caught up in our lives and, our shit, that it's so easy to forget, and maybe even trying to remember an anniversary of that parent's or that friend's death, and being able to ring in every year and just say, hey, are you doing okay? Because it continues for that person. It's crazy how life works that way. Like, the world really does keep on spinning, and there's so many, everyone has their own shit. And it's really hard not to sometimes just get all wrapped up in what's going on with you. Now, I want to touch on two more things before I let you go. And this has been fascinating. I'm a better person because of you already. I want to talk about, the fact that you are a spiritual person, but not religious. And, maybe just kind of scratch the surface on that, because the Lord knows how deep this conversation could go. We could probably do a podcast just on that alone. But where along the lines did you feel, I guess, okay? Because, there's stigmas attached to that kind of thing, to where, you can be a spiritual person, not be religious, and be in the space that you are right now of spiritual awakenings.
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's obviously, like you said, it's a charged topic, because the religions on the planet, hold a very a very strong attitude about a lot of things, each of them in their own right. Each of them have their own belief structures and systems and workings and communities. But on my journey, I mean, initially in my early years, I was brought up Catholic or Christian. We went to church here and there. And I actually, at a period of my life early in my childhood, I wanted to be a priest, and I was really involved in it. But then I started noticing just things that weren't, just didn't feel right, even at a young age, right? And they didn't feel right, and they didn't make sense to me. And so as I went through my kind of rebellious teens, like a lot of us did, I just kind of rebelled against everything, and didn't care so much as it wasn't I didn't believe, I just didn't care. It was more agnostic than anything, right? And I think that's a theme of a lot of people these days, because in our culture, at least the West, we've lost our connection in so many ways to that essence. and we could say that religions have failed us in some respect, but it's not so much they have failed us as much as it is that we're not really hearing or listening or actually coming into what the core of those teachings really were. You know, we're focused on the wars between religions, or we're focused on who's right or this or that. But if we look at, like, for instance, you know, there's a very common photo, it's shared everywhere, it's in schools, and it shows the golden rule, and it's in all the high schools, you know, it's the golden rule, and it's the same golden rule from every tradition. So what is that? You know, like, when we look at, okay, well, the prophets or the enlightened ones that were speaking, you know, these golden rules, they were speaking in different languages at different time periods in different geographies, but it was basically the same sentence, the same phrase. So how can that possibly be? Well, the way it could possibly be is that if there is some sort of underlying blueprint or fabric to spiritual teachings, or our path as a being coming to know ourselves, that is fundamental to all of us in some way. It's not oh, we're all individual and different, so we all can relate to the golden rule, like you mentioned. You know, like, when you drop, you know, when you're humbled, when your identifications are humbled, you naturally want to show up for people, you want to be more compassionate, you know, you want to be more loving. This is just a natural tendency. It's not some spiritual dogma or ideology. It's the most fundamental thing of our experience. Like, if a child's crossing the road, you know, and the car's coming, you're gonna run. You know, it's like, there's nothing to it. It's just it's the nature of who we are. So for me, that's what the journey came down to. Is I didn't care what I was studying. I could go deep into Buddhism or Christianity or yogic culture or shamanism or anything. It didn't matter what I was going into. It mattered what was the teaching, what was the fundamental fabric of what was being spoken. And as I went through so many of these traditions, I just found the same fabric. I found the same teachings in all of them that were representing basically the same thing. So it didn't become it wasn't difficult at all for me to communicate this and to share it from this place, because I knew what I was speaking to, and I knew what I was learning and living. And so it comes from a place where you recognize, you know, it's like the difference between when you believe something or when you know something. There's endless people who have a million different beliefs about religion and spirituality and God and happiness and love and all of this, but it's different when you actually know it. It's a fundamental aspect of your being. That's a whole different story. So when you know something, you're going to start speaking from that knowing. And that's what comes back to all those different masters that spoke the same thing, because they knew what they were speaking to. They weren't speaking from a religion. They were speaking from a knowing that's within themselves. Right. So that kind of, I feel, you know, pops the religion bubble, not to diminish the systems or diminish the traditions or diminish the belief structures, but to get real with ourselves. That's what it comes down to. Right. Like, for me, it just came down to this on my path. Is this teaching, is this scripture, is this you know, practice, is this actually supporting me in a deeper level of peace and love and joyfulness within myself? If not, then what use is it?
Right. When in doubt, leave it out.
Yep.
Yeah, I learned that in radio back in the day.
Yep.
You can use that, okay?
All right.
All right. So let's finish with this. There is going to be a strawberry moon. And I don't know what any of these moon cycles mean, these crystals, this and that. And I've had people on the show and I try to understand. I can't figure it out. What is this strawberry moon all about? And is there something significant that, you know, if we're willing to buy into this thing, how do we come out being better people because of this strawberry moon?
That's funny. Well, the strawberry moon, I actually don't know too much about, other than the fact that I you know, we recognize the time we're in right now, right? Which we're coming into solstice. Anytime we're coming into solstice every year is the peak of the sun. It's the peak. You know, we go into the death phase in the winter solstice, and then we come to the peak in June in the summer solstice. And the summer solstice is always a feeling of opening. That's why we feel that right now. We feel the opening. We feel a lighter feeling in ourselves. We feel transformation happening. We feel this next phase, what we're moving into, that may have more hopefulness. And I think there is a sense of hopefulness that is emerging right now.
Well, yeah, now that we're out of a lockdown.
Yeah, you know,
that helps.
that's, I think that's a key piece too, right? but like I said, there's small cycles, there's gigantic cycles, there's all kinds of cycles within the astrology. I don't actually get too caught up in it anymore, mainly because I recognize that if I come back to these like fundamental principles, a lot of what we spoke about today, what I speak about often, we become the masters of our own destiny, right? Where we're not succumbing to the movements of the stars and astrology. We respect them, right? We respect the fact that yes, we're in eclipse season, so there's going to be a lot of shifting, a lot of healing, a lot of relationship healing, in particular right now, and coming into a clear sense of what our direction is over this next maybe 6 months. That's always what's going to be the theme. And actually respecting that clarity, right? That listening of what's happening inside. But beyond that, I don't recommend people getting too caught up in that, because then it often can become a blame game. It's like, oh, it's the moon's fault. It's this fault and all that. And yes, again, like we can be influenced, and we are.
Right.
But we can balance ourselves to a degree where that influence doesn't really have as much of an effect on us, and that's a lot of what I share.
Oh, moon, the moon and stars. Oh, okay. So, Sheikh, this has been a fascinating chat, and quite possibly my favorite conversation thus far, because I believe it has a lot of value to the person that is listening. And I learned a lot. I really did learn a lot, and you have a phenomenal way of communicating, even though you use big words and a lot of syllables. So thank you very much for your time. And if people want to find out more about you, they want to reach out for a one-on-one session, how do they do that?
Instagram is a nice place, Infinite Sheikh or Corey Sheikh on Facebook, and my website ayp.life has a lot of resources. I got free resources everywhere. People can learn a lot and can connect with me as well. Yeah.
Well, I know that I'm doing something right in life, that I've manifested such amazing people around me. And I'm glad that 1 year later, we're here having this chat and you offering up so much value to the person watching this podcast. So thank you very much, Corey.
Thank you, man. This is really great.
Yeah, no problem. We'll do it again, but on a patio, okay? And I'll get a whole bunch of that free resource stuff. So thank you once again for having it locked right here to the Launchpad Podcast. You can find it online at the launchpadpodcast.com. You can also buy sweet merch like this. Hopefully we don't have another one of those shortages. You can also find me at YouTube at JManIsAlive. You take care, be well, and love simply because you can.